I never knew how freeing it felt to close a door until the day I walked away from everything I had ever known. Sitting on the edge of my mother's sagging sofa, I watched her stare back at me with cold eyes. She had said once, in that familiar tone of dismissal, "Don't expect anything from me." Those words echoed through my mind like a cruel mantra, weaving their way into every plan I ever made. I had tried to ignore her warnings, to ignore the venom in her voice, but her words had burrowed beneath my skin and settled there with relentless persistence. I wondered then if she ever understood the impact of her own bitterness. I remembered the morning I found the envelope tucked neatly between her worn paperback novels. The envelope was heavy, thick enough to conceal the weight of my intentions. I had written the letter late at night, my handwriting trembling as I poured out every ounce of hurt she had inflicted. I told her how her refusal to invest in me had shaped my life into a series of compromises and regrets. I explained that I had set aside money every paycheck, frozen and unopened, waiting for a day when it would mean something more than a quiet, sad reminder of what she refused to give. When I finally handed it to her, she looked at the envelope, as if it were a relic from another life, something she had no stake in anymore. Her lips curved into a small, cold smile that sent a shiver through my spine. I realized then that I was no longer seeking her approval. I was simply reclaiming my voice, my dignity, the future I deserved. I could feel the heaviness lift from my chest the moment I stepped away from our cramped living room and into the bright morning sun. My plan had been simple. I would leave at daybreak, carrying nothing more than a packed duffel bag and the last ember of hope flickering in my heart. The city skyline stretched out before me, the towers reaching into a sky painted with the soft hues of dawn. I took a deep breath, inhaling the promise of new beginnings and the warmth of a life untouched by her bitter expectations. I pressed my hand to the letter in my pocket, the paper crinkling softly against my palm. It was the only link I would ever need to sever. As I walked away from the house, I felt as though I was shedding a second skin. The pavement beneath my soles felt solid and real, each step carrying me further from her shadow. I glanced back only once, catching a glimpse of her silhouette framed in the doorway, her posture as rigid as the words she had spoken. I refused to look at her longer, unwilling to give her a role in this new chapter of my life. My heart pounded with the thrill of freedom, and I let the rising sun guide me forward. By midday, I had reached a train station, its platforms teeming with people chasing destinations of their own. I bought a ticket to a city I had never visited, a place where neither my mother's scorn nor her empty promises could follow. I sat on a bench, the letter and the account details lying beside me like companions on an uncharted journey. I studied the words I had written, each sentence a declaration of independence, each paragraph a puzzle piece of the self I was determined to become. The hum of conversation around me was a stark contrast to the silence I had endured for years. I closed my eyes and let the noise wash over me, absorbing the collective energy of 1,000 lives intersecting for a fleeting moment. In that instant, I felt alive. I realized that the letter would not be a weapon nor a plea. It would be a boundary, a final act of self-preservation. I had given her the chance to understand my pain, but I had also given myself the freedom to move forward without her. When the train arrived with a metallic screech, I stood and hoisted my bag over my shoulder. The doors slid open, and I boarded. With a steady heart, I found a window seat and watched the platform recede as the train picked up speed. My reflection in the glass was faint and distant, like a ghost I was leaving behind. The city blurred into a tapestry of concrete and glass, and I held my breath until it transformed into open fields and winding roads. I opened the letter, even though I knew I had nothing left to gain from rereading its contents. The words I had penned felt both fragile and unbreakable, like vows I had made to myself. I folded it carefully and tucked it back into the envelope, placing it on the seat beside me as if it were a small talisman. The frozen account details stayed in my jacket pocket, a secret promise waiting to be activated when the time was right. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the train car. I watched other passengers glance curiously toward me, wondering about the story etched on my face. I imagined the surprised gasp my mother would have when she finally opened the envelope, the sting of realization that her words had lost their power over me. But whether she felt remorse or remained indifferent, I no longer cared. My life was unfolding on tracks that led away from her, toward a horizon I shaped with my own hands. As the train carried me further from the familiar, I felt a quiet determination settle within me. I would build a life defined not by her expectations, but by my own dreams and choices. I would invest the frozen funds in a future she never believed I deserved, proving that my worth was not tied to her approval. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I welcomed the unknown with open arms, ready to discover who I could become without her shadow darkening my path. I thought about the tiny apartment where I grew up, the walls thin enough to carry every whispered argument and slammed door through the building. I remembered the nights I lay awake, listening to her footsteps pacing back and forth, carrying the weight of regrets I could never articulate. Her voice would drift through the paper-thin wall, scolding me for mistakes I had barely understood. I had spent so many years absorbing her disappointment, believing it was a reflection of my own inadequacy. In the half-light of that train car, I allowed myself to grieve the daughter who had lived in constant fear of falling short. I acknowledged the dreams I had buried beneath the rubble of her cynicism. It was a painful recognition, but it was also the first step toward reclaiming my identity. With each mile the train covered, I felt a piece of that frightened child peel away, leaving behind a stubborn spark of hope. I reached into my jacket and fingered the edges of the frozen account agreement. The idea of money untouched by her influence was intoxicating. It represented autonomy and the power to choose my destiny. I smiled at the thought of opening that account in a new city, depositing those savings as a symbol of my commitment to myself. Each dollar would stand as a testament to my resilience, untouched by the judgments that once held me captive. As the train rumbled onward, I pulled out a small notebook and pen from my bag. I began to sketch out plans, a modest apartment near the riverbanks of a city that felt like a blank canvas. I jotted down ideas for a job that aligned with my passions, not one dictated by her practical sensibilities. I wrote about the friendships I hoped to forge, people who would see me for who I was rather than what I represented to someone else. Time slipped by as the landscape changed. Trees gave way to rolling hills, then to industrial edges that hinted at new urban life. I folded the notebook and set it beside the letter and account details, creating a trio of tokens marking the closing of my past and the opening of a new narrative. I pictured the day I would retrieve each item, the way I would unfold the paper and feel the thickness of the first bill I deposited. The rhythmic clatter of the tracks became a strange kind of lullaby, soothing yet insistent. It propelled me forward, a reminder that life was transient and ever-moving. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, letting the breeze from the slightly cracked pane stir my hair. The scent of metal and distant diesel mixed with a hint of summer warmth, grounding me in the present moment. I closed my eyes and made a silent promise to myself. No more lingering on her harsh words. No more shrinking in the shadow of her expectations. I would step boldly into the days ahead with my own voice leading the way. And if she ever asked where I went, I would tell her I followed the sound of my own heartbeat. The letter in the frozen account would speak for me, a declaration that I was finished waiting for permission to exist on my own terms. When the conductor announced our next stop, I felt a rush of anticipation. I stood up, gathered my bag and the small bundle of papers that represented my liberation. As the doors opened onto a platform I had never seen, I took a deep breath and stepped into the unknown. The future was waiting, unwritten and unbound by the shackles of her doubt. And in that moment, I knew I had already started to write the first chapter of my new life. Standing on the platform, I felt my choice solidify. The crisp morning air filled my lungs, promising possibility. I sighed, touching the envelope at my side, knowing its contents truly marked the start of my new life. The morning air in this unfamiliar city felt sharper, infused with possibility and the faint hum of ambition. As I stepped onto the platform, the weight of my bag seemed lighter, as if the contents were mere tokens rather than burdens. I clutched the envelope and the frozen account details against my chest, feeling their edges crisp beneath my fingers. The station's concrete walls reverberated with footsteps and distant announcements, but inside me, everything was still. I let the bustle of strangers wash over me without disturbing the calm that had settled in my bones. With each breath, I reminded myself that this day belonged solely to me, untethered from the echoes of my past. I found a small cafe a block away, its windows fogged with the warmth of fresh coffee. I settled into a corner seat and unfolded the notebook, scanning the hastily scribbled plans I had written on the train. Ideas for work, friendships, even a modest celebration to honor my newfound independence stared back at me. I began to refine those plans, giving names to possibilities and assigning timelines that felt both ambitious and achievable. The barista brought an Americano and placed it in front of me with a knowing smile. I nodded my thanks, savoring that first bitter sip as it grounded me in the present moment. After paying for my coffee, I walked down streets lined with brick facades and wrought iron balconies, signs of a city with history etched into every corner. I observed pedestrians moving with purpose, a suited man engrossed in his phone, a young couple laughing as they shared headphones, an elderly woman feeding pigeons by a fountain. Their faces were unfamiliar, yet each told a story of their own. I felt a curious connection to these strangers, bound together by the pulse of urban life. I realized then that I was not simply escaping my past. I was immersing myself in a tapestry of new narratives, midday sunlight filtered through the leaves of an old oak tree in a small park. I sat on a bench and reached into my jacket for the frozen account paperwork. My heart skipped when I saw the balance figure I had almost stopped believing I would ever claim. I traced the numbers with my eyes, imagining each dollar as a stepping stone toward a future I designed. I took out my phone and searched for local credit unions, wanting to find a place that felt welcoming, one where I could open that account with a sense of ceremony rather than obligation. My fingers trembled with anticipation. I paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. The city's soundtrack included honking cars, distant sirens, and the hum of conversation spilling from open windows. I inhaled deeply, tasting the unique blend of exhaust and fresh pastry from a nearby bakery. In that moment, I acknowledged the mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through me. My mother's voice felt miles away, her cold dismissal overshadowed by the warmth radiating from these streets. I pressed a folded letter to my heart, not out of longing but as a reminder of the bridge I had burned in order to move forward. By late afternoon, I stood before a modest credit union nestled between a bookstore and a florist. The low brick building seemed unassuming, its glass doors reflecting the sky. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then pushed inside. The lobby smelled of polished wood and ink. A friendly teller greeted me and guided me through the paperwork with patience. When it came time to deposit the frozen funds, I watched the clerk input the numbers into the system. Each keystroke echoed in my mind like a victory drum. When the balance appeared on the screen, I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them away. This was not an act of desperation. It was a reclaiming of my own destiny. With the new account open, I walked back toward the river that carved its way through the city. The sun was beginning its descent, turning the water into liquid gold. I sat on a bench overlooking the current and removed the notebook once more. I sketched a floor plan for a small apartment near the waterfront, imagining windows that faced the sunset. I wrote down job leads I had researched earlier, noting contact information and potential interview dates. For the first time, my plans felt more than hypothetical. They were real, tangible maps to the life I had only dared to dream about. As dusk settled, I wandered into a lively neighborhood lined with bistros and jazz clubs. Music floated through open doorways, mingling with the scent of garlic and roasting coffee beans. I paused outside a small venue where a saxophonist played a soulful melody on the sidewalk. I dropped a few coins into his open case and watched as his eyes met mine, recognition flickering in his expression. I nodded in gratitude, feeling a kinship in our shared pursuit of something beyond mere survival. The music threaded through my thoughts, weaving a soundtrack for this chapter of my life. Night fell, and streetlights cast an amber glow on the cobblestones. I found a modest guest house and checked in for the night. The proprietor, a kindly woman who offered me a cup of chamomile tea. She asked where I was from, and I replied only that I was looking for a fresh start. She nodded as if she understood more than I could express. In my room, I laid out the letter, the account documents, and my notebook on the wooden desk. I touched each item in turn, honoring their significance in this journey. I then opened my laptop and began searching for jobs that aligned with my passions: writing, community outreach, anything that felt honest. Hours passed as I drafted applications and edited my resume. I felt a focused energy I had never known at home, where every effort felt overshadowed by her skepticism. Here in this quiet room, my efforts felt purposeful. I finished my final edit and hit send on the last application just before midnight. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair and closing my eyes. The silence was comforting, a stark contrast to the tension I had carried for years. I realized that though the night was dark, I felt safer than ever before. Lying in bed, I reflected on the day's journey. I had opened a new account, made concrete plans, and taken steps toward a future defined by my own terms. My mother's influence felt like a distant memory, her words unable to penetrate the fortress I had built around my aspirations. I reached for my notebook once more and wrote a single line. Today I chose myself. I closed the book and placed it on the nightstand alongside the letter and account details. The morning would bring new challenges, but for now, I slept knowing I had laid the foundation for a life I would shape with every choice I made. Morning light filtered through the curtains of my guest house room, carrying a sense of promise and urgency. I stretched and ran my fingers across the letter and account details sitting on the nightstand. My breath caught as I remembered how far I had come since stepping off that train. No longer weighed down by my mother's cold dismissal, I felt an electric thrill in my fingertips. Today would be the day I transformed plans into action, turning dreams into tangible reality. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my notebook, reviewing the job leads I had collected. My fingers traced each listing as I drafted emails and updated my resume. I knew competition would be tough, but I felt confident in my skills and experiences. I slipped into a dress and pinned my hair back before stepping into the hallway. The city's sounds greeted me as I walked outside, cars humming and people streaming past. I swallowed, determined to make each step count toward the life I envisioned. I arrived at the office building at 9:30, my heart pounding with anticipation. The receptionist directed me to the waiting area, where I sat among dressed applicants. Flipping through portfolios, I closed my eyes, steadying myself. When a sharp voice called my name, I rose and followed a door marked Office 123. Inside, two panelists studied my resume before looking up at me. I met their gazes and launched into my prepared answers, determined to truly prove my worth and secure the role that could change everything. Walking out of the building, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. The air smelled of spring. I decided to reward myself with a walk through a nearby park. Cherry blossoms dotted the pathways, petals drifting in the breeze like whispered promises. I found a group gathered for a community cleanup, and I joined them without hesitation. We picked up trash, swapped stories, and laughed at small jokes. For the first time in years, I felt connected to a community that truly welcomed me wholeheartedly. My first day on the job finally arrived. I entered the open office space and introduced myself to the team. Everyone seemed friendly, but I felt the knot of doubt in my stomach. I reminded myself that I had earned this position through hard work and resilience. During the morning meeting, I offered ideas and received nods of approval. By lunchtime, a colleague invited me to join for my favorite sandwiches. We chatted about the city's gems and our passions. I realized I was no longer an outsider. I belonged. After work, I visited the sunlit bedroom apartment I had reserved near the Riverwalk. The owner greeted me and explained the lease terms before handing over the keys. The unit was empty except for a kitchenette and a mattress. I measured walls, imagining where I would place a desk and a bookshelf. Carrying boxes up the staircase, I felt a sense of pride over this space. By evening, I arranged my belongings carefully and neatly. I stood in the center of the room, proud of how far I had come. That night I sat by my dining table and unfolded the letter I had written to my mother. The paper felt truly fragile, but the words still burned with honesty. I reread each sentence, acknowledging the pain behind them. I realized forgiveness would not come, nor was it required for my peace. I felt liberated. I finally placed the letter back in its envelope and gently tucked it into a drawer. I did not know if she would ever read it, but its existence marked the end of my waiting. That evening, my friend Maria invited me over for dinner. I walked along lamplit streets. She lit candles, poured me a glass of wine. She had cooked chicken and vegetables, filling her kitchen with aromas. We sat at her table, plates warm. We spoke of our families, our dreams. I told her about the frozen account that had felt like a safety net. She toasted my courage and reminded me that I deserved every opportunity. In her eyes I saw belief reflected back. It warmed me more than any meal. Monday morning brought an email from the hiring manager. My hands shook as I clicked it open. The subject line read, "Congratulations and welcome aboard." I sat with my mouth open, tears prickling my eyes. I called Maria immediately. It felt validating. I saved the email as proof that I was capable of success on my own terms. I happily forwarded it, closing a chapter of self-doubt. I pinned the message to my wall above my desk, a constant reminder of what I had achieved and what awaited ahead. Dawn arrived on my first workday, and I felt a sense of calm determination. I dressed in a blouse and pressed trousers. I paused in front of the mirror, meeting my own gaze with gratitude and resolve. I smiled at my reflection proudly. The envelope with my letter remained tucked away, the account safely activated with my new direct deposit. I stepped out into the city once more, ready to write this chapter from a place of strength rather than fear. My mother's words no longer held power. I did